Hey guys, my name is Luke. I'm going to talk about guns today, specifically how guns negatively impact the United States. I'm going to prove that by discussing how gun ownership increases murder rates, gun ownership does not deter crime and actually can increase it, and how gun violence actually increases societal costs. So back to my first point, gun ownership increases murder rates. The CDC reported that between 1999 and 2015, firearms caused 57.3% of all homicides. That's well over half. And a study, to go along with this, a study published in the American Journal of Public Health conducted by Matthew Miller found that in areas where households' firearm ownership rates were higher, a disproportionately large number of people died from homicide in those same areas. This demonstrates how firearm ownership, let alone an increase in ownership, can adversely affect homicide rates. And a rise in homicide rates negatively affects the United States. Gun ownership also increases suicide rates. According to the CDC, the number of suicides committed with a firearm between 1999 and 2015 totaled 313,589, which comprises just over 51% of all suicides. In a paper presented by the Military Suicide Research Consortium, it stated that when there is a reduced access to lethal means, close to 95% of individuals who attempt suicide but are prevented from using their preferred method do not actually end up dying by suicide. This is because suicidal crises are often short-lived. But this basically means that because of the availability and easy use of guns, it can lead to a sharp increase in suicide rates. On to my second point, gun ownership does not deter or stop crime, but can actually increase it. While there have been instances where legal gun owners have stopped crimes, generally they do not have the civilians don't have the training or the aptitude to react in those situations, and having a gun in those situations can cause the situation to easily become more dangerous and more deadly. Legal guns can also be stolen, which increases the chance that they'll be used to commit a crime. While it may not seem very prevalent, in a report by Lynn Langton of the Bureau of Justice Statistics, Langton found that about 1.4 million guns were stolen during burglaries and other property crimes in the 6-year period from 2005 through 2010. This means that 1.4 million guns can now be used in criminal activity. This high number of firearm theft supports a statement made by Ian Iries that with guns being a product that can be easily carried away and quickly sold at a relatively high fraction of the initial cost, the presence of more guns can actually serve as a stimulus to burglary and theft. So instead of guns being, instead of guns being the thing that protects you, it's the thing that puts a target on your back. Now people will want to steal it, and increased robberies negatively affects the United States. Gun ownership also increases the likelihood of a violent gun crime. The FBI found that in 2013, common arguments over things such as money and property resulted in 3,673 firearm deaths because a firearm was simply the most accessible weapon at that time and because of their ease of use. On to my third point. Gun violence results in increased societal costs which waste valuable resources. Guns don't just affect death, murder, suicide, burglary rates, it also affects the economy. The costs of gun violence can include anything from medical costs, legal costs, court expenses, policing expenses, lost productivity, prison expenses, and others. According to the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation, gun violence in 2010 accounts for over $17 billion in societal costs, $8 billion in direct costs, and $12 billion in government costs. This is all money that instead of being used to better the U.S. is used for loss on guns. Gun violence also costs hospitals large amounts of money. In 1994, it was found that in just one hospital, just by eliminating gunshot wounds and the price that came with treating them, even when replaced with the price of treating a stab wound, the savings at the hospital in 1 year would be approximately $1.5 million. The study also stated that approximately 75% of the money saved would have come from public sector funds. So that $1.5 million would be saving taxpayers and government money. Guns increase the death rate, they fail to deter crime, and they suck up limited resources from taxpayers and the government, all of which negatively impact the United States.
All right. The proposition's clearly identified. I think it's still quite broad, but you do have a claim of fact that you're dealing with here. There's a solid preview of what the supporting structure is. I think you rushed through it a little bit, so you can pace yourself. Clearly, the subject's controversial. There's a lot to argue about on this, so I don't have any problem with your choosing this as a topic. The internal sections, the first section is labeled, and you present some good evidence there. It sounded like you had 2 or 3 points there that you're making, and I wasn't quite sure whether you were transitioning to the second supporting point or whether it was just another minor point there. So maybe if you're going to do some internal structure on those individual points, you want to find some clearer way of making those declarative statements. But you explain everything, I think, very clearly on each of those points. And then when you got to the second point, I thought you clarified it pretty clearly. So it was easy to pick it out then. And plus, there was the label at the beginning. So it's not likely that you're going to get lost, but it is sometimes possible that you would get misdirected by some of the detail. That's all that's going on there. Like I said, I think you explained most of the information on the individual points. I do think there are a couple of points on the second point that aren't very well documented. For instance, the issue that people don't really know what the hell they're doing with their guns. I think that there's not much data on that. But the information that follows up about the frequency with which guns are involved in domestic disputes and that sort of thing. I thought that was good data for the point that you had. And then the third point presents some financial implications and social implications on that I thought were pretty well developed. It did seem like some of the data is a little bit old, 1994 on the one thing, but you had a good example that illustrated that point. A very good summary at the end of the speech, and I think that leaves a good impression with the audience so they know what the argument was that they heard, they understand those concepts. Whether they agree or disagree with the argument, they know what your position is, and that's especially important in an oral presentation. Thank you.